So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning or this afternoon for our session sponsored by Xybion entitled Best Practices for Enabling SharePoint Compliance. Today's guest speaker with us today is Chris Buska. Chris is a senior software analyst at Xybion Corporation and oversees development and support of our Compliance Builder software application, which we will be referencing towards the end of today's session. Before we get into the content, I want to obviously tell you a little bit about Xybion, why we think we have the right to be talking about this topic today. First and foremost, Xybion Corporation has been an integrated global technology company dating back to 1977. It's come together over the years through several acquisitions, and we've brought our technology and our services together in such a way that it's virtually used by all the top pharmaceutical CROs, life science companies globally today. I think if you were to rank the top 25 pharmaceutical companies, probably 95% of those top pharma companies are using a Xybion technology and or service in one way or the other. At our core, we are built to help accelerate innovation at companies, reduce overall costs, particularly when it comes to application and IT costs, and improve compliance throughout an organization. We are the market-leading provider of what we call embedded compliance solutions for highly regulated industries. And we've been a developer of a suite of interconnected software and apps, again, since 1977. And some of those include categories such as preclinical data management in our Pristima application, enterprise quality management with our EQCM, and of course, compliance monitoring software, what we're going to touch on today, known as Compliance Builder. There's also key services and solutions we provide around systems and computer validation, data management and data migration, as well as a whole suite of enterprise asset management with our partner, IBM Maximo. And obviously, you can learn more about this full suite of solutions at Xybion.com, and we encourage you to check out our website and learn a little bit more. So today's topic that we're going to discuss is obviously related to compliance, but more specifically, some of the things that we need to consider when we're dealing with compliance in a heavily regulated environment where there's pervasive use of SharePoint. And of course, compliance, as we define it, is the compulsory requirements that an organization is going to adhere to in order to secure information. Source of compliance requirements in the industries that we serve are going to, of course, be things like internal company standards or collaboration and partner standards, and of course, the regulatory mandates, most notably 21 CFR 11 is the one that we're dealing with most frequently. Regardless of the source of your requirements, what does compliance mean to you? First of all, you have to have a good understanding of those requirements. You have to have the proper implementation and controls in place, especially for your IT systems, to meet these requirements. And you have to be able to produce evidence of compliance on a regular or as-needed basis. Compliance and security. This sometimes are treated mutually exclusive, but they are inexorably linked. Much of what we do to secure SharePoint sites, for example, and the content itself helps to achieve compliance and vice versa. And if you rely heavily on SharePoint to house any of your critical information, whether that's regulated information or whether that's SOPs or things like that, you really should consider an overall strategy for governance, risk, and compliance, as well as data loss prevention. So where do some of the applicable regulations come from that do apply to SharePoint usage, particularly in some of the 21 CFR environments? There's 21 CFR 820.70. This is basically what covers the overall requirement that a company shall validate computer software for its intended use according to an established protocol. So when such software is used to automate a process, especially companies that are beginning to leverage the workflow component of SharePoint, as well as the tracking of SOPs in SharePoint. That's something to pay particular attention to. When we're dealing with 21 CFR 820.40, regulations for document control, including document approval, the distribution, the document change management. These are the processes being automated by the document management system. And of course, more and more and more, we're seeing SharePoint usage for document control and doc management in organizations. And then, of course, we have 21 CFR 11. This is going to detail the characteristics that a doc management system needs to demonstrate if it's used at the primary record-keeping system and or for e-cigs in lieu of paper-based records. Okay, so see, these are three of the key regulations that are going to come into play when we're dealing with any kind of SharePoint deployment in a highly regulated environment. So the case for strong security controls there was a recent survey that was conducted by AIM, which is the Association for Information and Image Management. And basically what it's found was that 48% of organizations are storing quote-unquote company confidential documents in SharePoint, as well as 12% which are storing quote-unquote secret, and 4% that are storing what they would classify as top secret documents. SharePoint is very much becoming a repository for information that requires very strong security controls. Only 12% always audit their sites against key compliance and security measures. So while you have an ever-increasing usage of SharePoint, whether that's due to cost, whether that's due to convenience, whether that's due to global licensing of Microsoft technology in an enterprise organization, the use of SharePoint is exploding and it's becoming more and more pervasive. But what's not keeping up are the proper security and protocols that go along with that, depending on what you're putting in it. It's better than Excel. One of the things that we deal with here on a very regular basis at Xybion is ensuring that the use of Excel or other spreadsheet-like applications in regulated environments is properly managed under 21 CFR 11. And we do that, of course, with the Compliance Builder product as well. But we're seeing a little bit of a shift away from the unfettered use of Excel into more structured use inside of SharePoint. But what we're not seeing is the proper compliance, proper protocols keeping pace with the adoption of it. It's cheap, it's online, it's very quick to set up, it's very quick to deploy, and as such, it tends to be pervasively used but not pervasively regulated. Writing policies governing the use of SharePoint platform is simple, but verifying that they are being followed is, of course, critical, and that's where a good validation and risk management protocol come into play. SharePoint usage in GXP environments. What is SharePoint? If you don't have a lot of experience with SharePoint, it's fundamentally a web portal technology. It's a highly flexible and customizable application. In GXP environments, some of the most common uses are going to include the management of documents and records, the management of lists and trackers, again, oftentimes replacing some of the traditional Excel and Access database usage, which we see that as a big positive, because Excel and Access databases are very difficult to validate and very difficult to really kind of get your compliance head around, so to speak. We're also seeing it being used more and more, especially in some of the more recent versions, to implement workflows and manage actual SOPs. It's used to establish and maintain collaboration amongst geographically dispersed groups, which is, again, great, but when you have to start managing these geographically dispersed groups and validate the usage at these levels, it can become a challenge for even the largest organizations. So the use of SharePoint as a document and process control system in regulated environments is increasing dramatically. We need to make sure that we're ensuring the proper validation and control procedures in real time to help ensure compliance and provide a risk-based approach for document management. So we'll dig into a couple of the workflows that we're seeing used most commonly and what their relevance is to 21 CFR 11. Firstly, e-signatures. So SharePoint 2013 workflows can be configured to use e-signatures with versioning and audit trails in a 21 CFR compliant way. And Part 11 does allow for what they call two-part authentication, such as the username and the password. So as SharePoint 13 came out, again, this really started to drive its usage and adoption for 21 CFR applications. Document workflows, it can send emails and reminders to users of their signature requirement, their signature pages that are created. Retention schedules can be set, and things like off-the-shelf electronic document management, or EDMS. There's also audit trails. You can use the audit feature of Microsoft SharePoint Server, okay, important to note the server piece, to track which users have taken what actions on the sites, what were the content types, the lists, the libraries, the list items, the library files, as well as the site collections. So achieving compliance in plus security, right, going beyond just the pieces of Part 11, number one, validation. You need to have validated your SharePoint for its intended use. And again, a big part of the solutions and the services part of what Xybion is all about, in addition to just the software, is helping companies with these validations. And you know, there may not be as many folks internally who have the type of experience to deal with SharePoint from a validation standpoint as there are more traditional applications that have been around for a long time or used for a long time. Document change control. So you have set up document workflows, e-signatures, and retention schedules. But what about security? Okay, thinking about security, again, this can oftentimes be a little lax. Security and compliance, you have to understand, go absolutely hand in hand. Controlling security via user permissions is necessary, but not sufficient to ensure security, because permissions are too often meant to mean security. So how will you show evidence? By simply configuring user permissions. You can't do that. Critical features for maintaining SharePoint security. Number one, watching user activities for key libraries. Receiving automated alerts or notifications when organizational policy is violated, when these SOPs that you may be putting in place are actually violated. This is where the danger of 483s can really come into play, and having a proper solution in place that can detect and even prevent some of these allows for that early intervention. So the one most common scenario that we run into that we have to address is the users leaving the company. They download multiple critical files in a very short period of time. How do you know that that's actually happening? How are you able to stop that from actually happening? So number one, you're selecting the SharePoint libraries. Number two, you're configuring organizational policy. Number three, you're configuring the alert mechanisms and receiving the automated reports. Let me jump back to that real quick. And then, of course, it's prompting you for early intervention. Okay, so when we holistically look at SharePoint, we have to take all of the proper steps. Number one, we've got to set up the proper configurations that now come with SharePoint to support 21 CFR Part 11. We have to go through the proper steps of validation, whether that's internally or through an exterior service like those provided by Xybion. And then we also have to have a solution in place for early detection of SOP violations, process violations, things along those lines, and of course, enhanced security, which is really what we're going to start to talk about now from a product point of view. So Compliance Builder, and we're going to transition over and ask Chris to jump in here, and he's going to talk us through a couple of sections. Really what Compliance Builder does is it attaches itself to a certain application or a certain machine or a certain desktop, and it allows you to configure certain rules in the system by which that machine or that application has to behave. So in the case of SharePoint, again, we identify what some of the most common risks are associated with it in regulated environments, and the one we see most commonly is the fast and mass download of documents by an individual at one time. So what I'm going to do is we'll have Chris come on, Chris, and we'll talk a little bit about this notion of user activity and audit reports and how these are applicable based on what we've talked about. Chris?
All right, thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So as Kevin stated, Compliance Builder is a tool that was primarily developed to bring along 21 CFR Part 11 compliance to file and database systems. This SharePoint module that we developed, it came about as a need from a few companies with this need to monitor for excessive downloads from a SharePoint library. And so what we're looking at right now is actually the end result of the Compliance Builder SharePoint module, where it actually tells us, who's been doing a lot of excessive downloading and which library they've been downloading from, and also how many documents they have downloaded within a certain amount of time period. And so this report can be pulled up anytime from the Compliance Builder web interface. And all of these events that are listed here, they also get emailed in real time as the alert is triggered to whoever your system administrator might be. All right, go to the next slide, Kevin. All right, so in setting that up, you can connect Compliance Builder to one or many SharePoint servers, and then within each SharePoint server, you can monitor one or many libraries, whichever ones are critical to your business infrastructure. So in the bottom left, we have a screenshot showing how we connect to the SharePoint server, and then also the configuration for who is going to receive emails whenever any alerts are triggered. And then in the top right screenshot, we see the list of libraries which are pulled over automatically for you, and then whichever ones are being monitored for the excessive downloads, you'll see a little check mark in the audited checkbox there. And then if you hit the configure button, can you go to the next slide? And then when you hit the configure button, this is where you tell Compliance Builder what is excessive for this particular library. So for this one, I'm saying that if a user comes in and they download 2 files within 1 minute, that this is unusual behavior and that I want Compliance Builder to generate a system alert for this activity. And so when the system alert is generated, it goes back to that same information we saw in the first slide of the report, telling us, who's downloading the files, which library they're downloading from, and then a partial list of all the documents that they're downloading. Okay.
Yep. So, Chris, what might be also helpful, so we'll do a quick summary and wrap up here, but we also want to maybe expand a discussion a little bit. So we have this whole notion of the SharePoint compliance, SharePoint security. SharePoint, of course, has the built-in features that are going to help support 21 CFR, including the audit, the e-sig, and the document change control, which is great. Going beyond compliance with mandates such as Part 11, we recommend this whole notion of a full-blown security strategy like what you've just shown, as well as data loss prevention. So user permissions, obviously going to be helpful to protect critical files, but again, we don't believe that that's sufficient in ensuring security. We obviously believe the Xybion Compliance Builder solution, which has been used frequently in this scenario with SharePoint, allows organizations to monitor that key user activity and send notifications and enable intervention. However, we want to, of course, note that this type of application, this quote-unquote real-time compliance monitoring application, is not necessarily something that's just tied or tethered to SharePoint. It's the type of application that can essentially be connected to any machine, any device, any application, any database, or even spreadsheets for that matter, and help to ensure that compliance as well. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about how this is applicable in other areas of an organization. So Chris, what I'll ask you to do is I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter. And how about if we bring up Compliance Builder, and maybe you can walk us through some of the scenarios where this application can be used, not only within SharePoint, of course, but throughout an organization.
All right. Sure thing, Kevin. Thank you again. Can you see my screen all right?
Yep, we can see it just fine. Thank you.
All right. So the main goal behind Compliance Builder was to provide 21 CFR Part 11 compliance to files that exist on a Windows workstation. Now, these can be any files that you can think of, whether they're your SOPs, your work instructions, or whether they're instrument configuration, recipe files, or just any sort of logging files that you want to keep a track of where the information in those files is sensitive, it works with sensitive information in your company, and that the FDA requires that you have a record of who's been making changes to those files and also possibly their signature and their reason for making changes to those files. And so the most common pain point that Compliance Builder solves that I've worked with many companies to implement this is for the various instruments that they may be running on their site. So they typically have an instrument connected to a Windows workstation, and then on that Windows workstation they would have a directory of instrument configuration and recipe files, which controls how the instrument runs and tests, the samples or whatever they're doing. And then there's also a directory where the instrument's going to output the results from whatever it's doing. And so those are both key directories that a company would want to apply the compliance to, and to ensure that whenever these files are changed and created, that there is a record of who's been making these changes. And then so that's where Compliance Builder comes in as a wraparound to those files on your Windows workstation. Now, it can either be done in the background, completely invisible to the user, or we can take Compliance Builder a step further in that whenever a user makes a change or creates a file, that Compliance Builder would actually pop up a notification and prompt that the user signs off on whatever they've been doing. So I just want to show an example of that real quick. What we're looking at now is the CV web interface. And through this web interface, users can run the audit trail reports, and also an administrative user can come in and configure the system itself. So I just want to show real quick how simple it is to set up a file monitor in Compliance Builder. So I have this directory of example configuration files for an ADVIA instrument. So basically, all you have to tell Compliance Builder is where are these files located, and then what directory are the files actually in. And then you can also pick and choose, if you have specific files that you want to monitor in a directory. You can monitor spreadsheet files only, or you can monitor specific instrument file types only, or you can simply monitor for all files that go through this particular directory. And then Compliance Builder also has powerful tools to let you create many notification groups. So this actually controls who's going to receive notifications, whether they're through email or through a pop-up user interface that we have. And then every time something is changed, modified, or deleted, any notifications triggered would be sent to the users in these groups. So for the example I want to show, let me go ahead and bring up this folder here. So I'm in, if I click up here, you can see I'm in the C Instruments ADVIA folder. And these are just example configuration files. I'm obviously not running a real instrument on this machine, but these are the type of configuration files you might see in a day-to-day use within your company. So if I, as a user, if I start coming in here and making changes to these configuration files, now normally there is no control to this. A user can come in here, they can make changes. You don't know what they've been doing. But now, as you see there, I got my user interface popping up already. It happens pretty quickly once those files are changed. If you're in the Compliance Builder notification group, you see this window pop up here, which is what we call our Compliance Builder agent. And so we see I got events for each of those 2 files that I changed. Now, if I click on one of them, it gives me a little bit of information about that change, such as which file was changed, where the change occurred, and then who made the change, and also the time of the change. Now for this particular directory, I did not enable gathering signatures, so that's why we see these fields down here are still disabled. So let me go ahead and confirm these, and then make another quick change within a folder where I am gathering signatures. So I have these for this particular folder, the options here are checked to require a signature and also a comment. Now I just want to be clear that all of these options are independent between each of the folders that you're monitoring. There's no just one shot for everything. Compliance Builder is freely and easily configurable for each of your directories. So for this one, I have a folder here called Excel Test. Let me bring that up and open one of these spreadsheets. All right, this time you can see this is another example that I typically demo, in that this spreadsheet is an example of a task planning project. So we have all your different tasks here and the effort for each of the tasks. So if I were to change one of them, if I go ahead and save it, now once again we see that the agent application pops up within a few seconds. This time it's telling me that I changed the spreadsheet, and now when I select it, I see that I'm required to enter a comment in my signature down below. So let me go ahead and do that. So now Compliance Builder will store a record in our secure database that this file was changed by this user on this time, and that the user signed off on the change with this comment and this signature. Okay, and then after we do some changes, we can come through the Compliance Builder web interface at any time to pull up an audit trail of everything that's been going on. So let me I'll pull up a good range of dates just so we have a nice looking report. Okay, so we see that in the audit trail report, the same type of information is displayed to the user, such as which file was changed, when the change occurred, and then who made the change. Now these last 4 fields here, they're NA if you're not gathering a signature for this directory. If you are gathering a signature on that directory, then you also see the user's signature in these last 4 columns as well. And then also, besides the audit trail report, we can browse the various directories that we have monitored. And then we see all the current files in there, and then also what revision they are at relative to when Compliance Builder was installed. So since Compliance Builder was installed, this particular file here has been updated 18 times. And if I look down below, I have a record of each of those revisions telling me, when it occurred and also who made the change if I scroll a little bit over here. Okay. Now we also, besides the file monitoring, another common need that we have is some clients have databases that they would like monitored as well. And those can be MS SQL databases or Oracle databases. And we've also added support for Microsoft Access databases as well recently. And so when we configure the monitoring for a compliance builder, or not a compliance builder database, I'm sorry, but for any sort of database that you have in your company, what we will do is you tell us the tables you want to monitor, you tell us then which fields in that table you want to monitor, and then whenever a change occurs to that particular column in the database table, Compliance Builder will generate an event in the same way. So let me just briefly show the configuration of that. I have my database server here. I have my tables that I'm monitoring come up automatically once the connection is made. And then within each table, I have the various fields that I'm monitoring as well. And so for my example, and for another real-life use case, is that I have my instrument configuration being saved in a database. And so this is the configuration table I'm monitoring. And then I'm also monitoring for any results that the instrument outputs directly to a database. And so for this particular table, I'm only looking at the date modified field, knowing that if the date modified field is updated, then this entire record in the database should be reviewed if that's required. So let me go ahead and actually make a change to a database record. So this is that same table that I've configured to monitor within Compliance Builder. Now if I come in here and say if I start changing the configuration for this particular instrument, say I've moved it to a different IP address. Now normally this would be handled through whatever application manages your instrument. I'm just doing it directly through SQL Server Management Studio as an example. But we see that once that record is changed, we now see a database transaction pop up in our notification here. And so similar information is shown, just more tailored towards a database event. So it's telling us here, the table that was changed, the column that was changed. It's telling us whether it was an insert, an update, or a delete. It's telling us the primary key of the record. And then it's also telling us what the old value was and what the new value was right in the window here. And just like for the file-based monitoring, I'm able to configure Compliance Builder to gather signatures or not. In this case, I am gathering a signature. So I sign off on this event in the same way that I signed off on my file events. And then similarly for my file records, we have a database change report as well. And then we see all the information or all the records that have been changed from September 1st until today. And so each change is its own row in the report here, telling us what was changed, which table, which field, who made the change, the application that initiated the change, and then the key of the record, and then the user signature, if so configured, to gather it. And so those are a couple ways that Compliance Builder has helped out. All right.
That's great. I appreciate that, Chris. Yep. And it's obviously it's good to know that this solution can both be deployed obviously with SharePoint. As a purpose of today's presentation, we obviously wanted to focus around SharePoint for obvious reasons, not the least of which is the pervasiveness of its use that we're beginning to see in 21 CFR type environments. But of course, the application itself has been built over many years to be able to handle many different situations. So we're going to go ahead and wrap today's session up. I want to, of course, thank Chris for joining us today. We also have ways to get in touch with us through our sales office. And then we also have Sunil Tiwari, who is our Technical Operations Director for Compliance Solutions. His contact information is up here as well. If you'd want to schedule more of a full customized demonstration of the Compliance Builder application, learn a little bit more about how it can potentially be deployed in your own organization, we'd of course be happy to discuss that. Otherwise, we will go ahead and bid adieu and thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Please be on the lookout for the follow-up email with the on-demand video and the PDF from today's session. Today's session is now complete, and have a great afternoon. Thank you for attending.